Well, we got a minute here. I know people have places to go and other committees going on. We're going to go ahead and call this Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications Committee to order. And it's 3 o'clock, and I think we have a good good attendance here from the committee. I appreciate y'all coming. And like I say, I know there's a Blue Million committees meeting this afternoon. Time is running out. First of all, I'm going to call upon Chairman Martin. You have a bill, sir. I don't know what. There you go.
Mr. Chairman, a report out as a subcommittee chair. This also actually Representative Cantrell, I don't know if he's here, chaired the meeting, the portion of the meeting where this bill was heard. But it does come to you on the full committee with a due pass recommendation. This is House Bill 428, LC 440325. What this bill, if I may go ahead with the presentation, Mr. Chair. So it does come to you from subcommittee with a due pass recommendation, and as the author of the bill, I'd make a brief presentation to the full committee. The bill is carries on some work that was done in the 2013-2014 session that was Senate Bill 242. Senator Hill and Senators Hill and Mullis brought it forward to basically allow the downtown development authorities to do some projects through their inducement. Some of those were around solar. And what this bill does is adds language in Code Section 364217. I think I'm going to speak legal here and say it allows it to perfect the assessment such that the property could be lien. So if you look at lines 13 through 17 in the bill, as those three things are accomplished by the lawyers that are putting it together, it makes the bond inducement become perfected, and a bond lawyer feels good about the project and the development authority doing the bonds for the project. So the references into Code Section 3642.3 are to the work that have been done in previous Senate bills. This is, I think, in legal terms, Mr. Chairman, what you would refer to as belt and suspenders. Many people think that there's already code in place that says these agreements have to be in place before the project would go forward, but this just gives three items to check off to make sure a property owner is in agreement and becomes part of the inducement. I think it'll help our development authorities to move these projects along faster when property owners want them.
You got any questions?
Take any questions
Any questions from members of the committee? I don't see any questions, Chairman Martin. Then what is the will of the committee on this bill? House Bill 428, LC 440325. What's the will of the committee? We have a motion to do pass. Second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. The measure carries. House Bill 428, LC 440325, has a due pass recommendation from this committee, and we'll move on to rules. Representative Powell is in a meeting I think that he's conducting right now, and so he may come in any time. I don't think he's here, so we're going to hold off on this one a little while longer. We'll get to it, but. So therefore, let's see. Let's go ahead. Let me turn this first of all over to our secretary, Representative Holmes, if you would preside. In fact, I'll move away from here and you can move over here. How about that?
Chairman Parsons, do you want to start with LC 1150216? HR 361?
That's a House resolution.
Did you want to do that one first? Okay.
All right, this is a resolution. Am I on? Sorry, sir. Okay, this is a resolution that was actually brought to me by a friend of Chairman Dollar's, and asked me to do this. And it's encouraging the enactment of a regulation freedom amendment to the Constitution of the United States by the United States Congress. And it's an anti overregulation resolution. And whereas the Regulation Freedom Amendment states, whenever 1/4 of the members of the U.S. House or the U.S. Senate transmit to the President their written declaration of opposition to a proposed federal regulation, it shall require a majority vote of the House and the Senate to adopt that regulation. And that's it. I mean, the members have yeah. Help me with this, Chairman. You got a motion and a second.
Ooh, thank you very much. Any discussion? All in favor? Please say aye. Any opposed? No? No? One no? Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, is next, House Bill 413.
Okay. All right, 413, let's see. With your permission, Madam Chair, I'm going to ask Adam Wise. He presented this in subcommittee, and he's well versed on this. He'll come up and present this bill.
Yes, sir, Mr. Wise.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Talk loud. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, I'm Adam Wise, the Georgia Telecommunications Association. We bring before you today House Bill 413. And what House Bill 413 does is it mimics current Georgia law with one minor tweak, and that is that instead of applying to the electric cooperatives, this now applies to the telephone cooperatives. And so what it would do is that under 413, it would allow the telephone cooperatives who issue dividends or capital credits, once those are deemed abandoned, it would allow those telephone cooperatives to place those dividends or capital credits into a 501c3 and then disperse them in their community for the reasons of economic or education. We think it's a good thing that would generate funds that are generated in the community to be used in that community for the benefit of that community. And then it does a few other things as well. It specifies what venues the telephone cooperatives can be sued in. It also allows the board of directors to amend the bylaws. And it also clarifies what happens to revenues that are allocated to certain deceased members of the telephone cooperatives. And that's what it does, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
You have questions?
Thank you.
Mr. Wise, correct me, I think we did see this for the EMCs last year, but failing to do this would go into the unclaimed property in the state. It would normally sheet to the unclaimed property of the state.
That is correct. Any dividends or capital credits that are deemed abandoned would be remitted to the state.
Okay, so the only question I had, and I think I asked it last year, is when the EMCs, or in this case the telcos, deem them abandoned, they would normally sheet, or through the state laws, they would sheet to the state. Are we closing or shortening the window for those that are due these at all in this legislation?
Not at all, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that's just what if you were mimicking what we had done before, but if you could just articulate that. So those that are due the money have the same number of days, years in order to collect it that they would have otherwise. Is that true?
Correct. Under this legislation, it actually extends that for an additional 6 months.
Okay.
Mr. Raffensperger.
Just from a point of clarification, how many cooperatives do we have in the state of Georgia?
There are 4 telephone cooperatives in the state.
Okay, and approximately how many people do they serve?
I do not have those numbers with me, but I can get those numbers for you.
And finally, what type of monies would we be talking about?
At most, it depends on what type of patronage, what amount of patronage the board decides to retire. But with only 4 cooperatives, they're relatively small in the rural communities. At most, it would be no more than $50,000
Okay.
between all 4 of them.
And what counties right now?
They're in Metter, Newington, Bullock, and there's one more in South Georgia that I'm not clear on, so
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay. Chairman Dickey.
I'd just like to make a statement to the committee. I'm very familiar with electric cooperatives. We're allowed to use these capital credits, and it's been really a great program. I think Chairman Willie Tappan brought that legislation some number of years ago, and it's been a great thing for the cooperatives. So I'm sure it would work just as well with these telephone cooperatives. My life is the money will go back to the communities.
Correct.
Foundation, there's been a lot of good things happen with that. So the money plowed back into the communities through this nonprofits.
Yes, thank you, Representative. Go back for education and economic development in the communities.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wise.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we have a motion to pass. Is there a second? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, moving on to House Bill 479.
All right, thank you, Chair Lady. House Bill 479, I don't think I'm on again, Madam Chair. House Bill 479, I'm not going to ask any action be taken in the committee today, but just briefly, what this would do, as it's currently written, in the not the RFP, but the what is it called? The Integrated Resource Plan process, where utility brings their 20-year plan to the Public Service Commission. In that code section, in that section of the code, which is very short, this would just add, as part of its determination in the Integrated Resource Plan, the Commission, being the Public Service Commission, shall not recommend or mandate any changes to an Integrated Resource Plan related to the sources of energy to be used by a utility for the generation of electricity. And what this is about, it's not anti-solar, it's not pro anything or anti anything. It's I think that there needs to be some questions asked about what is the authority of the Public Service Commission, and I think that certainly the intention is for the Public Service Commission to be a regulatory body and not a policy-making body. And in particular, in the 2013 IRP process from Georgia Power, there was action taken by the PSC that kind of forced, in that IRP process, Georgia Power to add solar capacity. And I'm not opposed to it. I think that probably has been a good thing, but I don't know that it was necessarily vetted really thoroughly in that process. And I think that probably one particular PSC commissioner, that was part of his agenda, and it may or may not have been vetted properly through that. So I think it's something we just need to look at. I'm not asking y'all to take any action on this, but it will be a vehicle, I think, through the interim and as we go toward next session to try to get some information. And the Integrated Resource Plan process is something I've had an interest in for a long time, but never really got into it, even before the 2013 Integrated Resource Plan. And it seems to me that there's some questions, and I think that there'll come a day, I don't know, it's not going to come next year or the year after that or the year after that, there'll come a day when we don't need a PSC. And I think we need to start looking at their responsibilities and what they do. And regulatory versus policy-making authorities. So with that, I'll stop on that.
Okay, now, what about Chairman Powell? Oh, yes, sir.
Chairman Parsons, thank you for bringing this. As this moves forward, I've asked this question of myself, and it may be a moot point with some of the things going on in Washington with the Clean Power Plan, but I often ask and wondered, with the Clean Power Plan, where federal regulation was in direct conflict with state law relative to power generation and least avoided cost, maybe we look at that, because I often wondered if the Clean Power Plan required the commission to go with one integrated resource plan that was opposite what state law says, which I think is the lowest cost methodology. Be interested if you would maybe include a conversation on that. Basically, the question being, does state statute trump federal regulation? I think that would be an interesting thing to look at.
Good question,
as well.
good point. And Chairman Martin, I will definitely ask for your input and your help with this, and as I will for the whole committee.
Any more questions or comments about House Bill 479? Oh,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, but Mr. Chairman Parsons, when you brought this before us, it seems to me that what your intent is really to give consumers the widest variety of low-cost options, and which is an admirable goal. And so I guess, and isn't it really our position to mandate what a power company, how they generate the power? At the end of the day, as consumers, because we all consume electricity, isn't our goal really to have the low-cost, best solution, for us? So was that, your intent?
Well, I mean, what you're saying is correct. I don't necessarily think that whatever utility wants to do, I don't think they should have full latitude with that, and that's not the intent with this. I think in general that they are certainly experts. They know more than I do, to make those determinations. But when you look at the IRP code, that related to the source of energy is there are other aspects of it in there that that the PSC has latitude over, but that's the one in my opinion it's a little different. I mean, to me, that is a big jump when you actually mandate to one of those companies what source of energy that they use to generate the electricity. So I think that's kind of a different than some of the other parts that they can have some latitude over. So, but you make a very good point. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your bill.
Any further comments, questions? Okay, Chairman Parsons,
I'm sorry.
are you ready to come back to your chair?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. We're actually, as everybody knows, we're up against the wall for the getting bills to the clerk's office before the clerk's office closes, and get them to clerk's office so that they can then be submitted to the Rules Committee, and that whole process that, that happens then before a bill can be on the blue sheet, or I forget what they call it, the bills that can be called for in rules to go in the rules calendar. So we're trying to make sure we get all that stuff taken care of. We have one more bill. And what is that bill number? 446. House Bill 446. And this is a bill that Chairman Alan Powell is carrying, but I still don't see him. He's conducting some meetings too. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. Just got finished. Well, I'm not going to speak to the bill, certainly being chairing the committee, but I will just say that it's what this is. It has to do with the collection of fees for the 911 centers, and this bill, or the idea, the concept of the bill has been around for over 2 years now, and there's been a couple of versions of it. And 2 years ago, right at this time in the session, there was a bill that I don't remember. There was one party, I guess, that was okay with it, but any other party that had anything to do with 911 at all was opposed. So it was basically chaos. Then last year, there was a bill that Representative Hitchens had about the same time of the year, but there was still one. There was one member of industry that still had an issue with it, and there was no use to proceed with it. And this year, it's my understanding, they'll tell you about this when they present the bill. But this year, it's my understanding, and what was presented to us in the subcommittee, is that the parties that were involved in the negotiations are all in agreement with this bill. I know there's some parties that were not involved in the negotiations that may not be happy with the bill, but those that were involved in the negotiations are all together on it, and it has to do with getting enough funding into the 911 centers. And our interest, I think, should be that for these 911 centers, that when somebody has an emergency, whether it's a car accident on the interstate or a back road, or if there's a family emergency, somebody gets hurt, an industrial emergency, a farm emergency, some kind of a domestic situation where somebody's been hurt or about to get hurt, that those calls are taken, as quickly as possible, processed, and then somebody is dispatched to help as quickly as possible. That's what it's really about. I mean, that's the bottom line, is making sure that these emergencies are taken care of. Come a long way when you just have to call the fire department or the police department and so on. Come a long way, and there's more good things coming in related to 911, and I'm not an expert on it, but it was mentioned in the subcommittee that it's coming to where even more definitely, precisely define where the caller is, not just an address, but in the middle of a street or on a street corner or under the light post or whatever. So a lot of good things coming, and but I'm not here advocating for the bill one side or the other. I guess I'm stalling, so I guess we need to go ahead and move along. If he comes, then we'll.
I think he probably will. Did y'all break?
I think that'd be a good idea, because it may take him a few minutes to get here.
He's got a bum knee, as he told everybody. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Deborah Nesbitt with the Association of County Commissioners. And I'll go through the bill and lay a little groundwork. And what you said about this being a public safety issue is exactly true. It really is. The 911 centers are really the backbone of our public safety system. You can't get anybody dispatched without the 911 center, whether it be police, fire, EMS, or whoever. And Chairman Parsons spoke to new technology, and the new next-gen 911 will allow first responders to more adequately pinpoint where someone is by their phone call. But additionally, it'll allow for the transmittal of video and voice directly to the 911 center. So think how helpful that would be to a law enforcement officer arriving on a scene or a firefighter going in to a fire. So that really is what we're looking at. Right now in Georgia, we have a very decentralized system. There is no state entity or body at the state level that is responsible for coordinating 911 activities, planning, training, standards, enforcement of the service suppliers for making sure that they bill and remit the charges, and that all providers are registered and paying and collecting the fees that they're required to by statute. So I can go through the bill section by section, and I'll try to do that fairly quickly. I know it's late in the day and everybody wants to get out, and we're up against the 5 o'clock clock.
It's my understanding it's actually earlier than that. I thought,
Okay.
I thought it was 5 too, but I think they stopped. It's actually 4, and maybe if we're lucky, a few minutes after. So.
So I'm going to kind of go quickly through this and then take any questions. It basically, Section 1 just creates the local government 911 authority with 15 board members who all come from local government who operate PSAPs, as well as sheriffs, because a PSAP is a public safety answering point, and that is a 911 center. So it pretty much just goes through and sets that up just like any other authority in the state. It tracks standard language. It also provides for penalties for service providers who fail to register or bill or remit 911 charges. Currently, there really is no enforcement mechanism out there to either audit or enforce requirements of the statute. This would allow the authority to do that centralized auditing. Therefore, service suppliers would not be subject to 150 audits by 150 different counties. They'll just be dealing with one auditor, one audit once every 3 years. Section 2, again, it sets up the authority just as others in the state are set up. Section 3 updates definitions regarding telephone service and subscribers to more adequately address current technology and business practices, particularly in the area of VoIP lines and call centers and multi-line systems in large office buildings. The original 911 statute was passed in the 70s prior to us having multi-line systems or VoIP systems. And so this really just updates the definition so that service suppliers have a better roadmap for how they comply with the statute and a clearer way to remit the charges. Section 6 just requires that all service suppliers register and that there are penalties if they fail to. We have a lot of really small VoIP, voice over internet providers that operate out in some of the rural areas that have not registered. They may be charging the 911 fee, but they're not remitting it to local government. Or either they're not charging it and not remitting it. But they are supposed to, if you have a device that can contact 911, there should be a 911 charge associated with that device. The others are just fairly... Section 10 just allows the authority to accept federal funds. Right now, we don't have a state-level entity that can do that. And so that would really help the state in looking to address the next-gen 911. Section 12 clarifies billing procedures and payment of 911 fees for service suppliers. There was some language in the statute about Phase 1 and Phase 2 and a varying fee. That is outdated. Everybody has gone to the Phase 2, and it's my understanding from the 911 directors that 911 fee is $1.50 across the state. It just updates that language. Then on line 557 through 562, it removes the requirement that the 911 fee be listed as a separate line on the phone bill, but it does require that the service suppliers keep that in a format that is auditable. In other words, they have to be able to show the auditors that they have indeed billed and collected that fee. It requires that service suppliers remit fees monthly to the authority. It eliminates the ability of service suppliers to charge local governments a cost recovery fee. This will generate a lot of new revenue for your local 911 centers. Currently, some of the service suppliers, they pay $1.50 comes in for the fee. They can bill that, they remit the $1.50, and then they can go back and bill that local government and most of them are billing at 30 cents of that $1.50 fee that has to be paid back to them for building out their infrastructure. In exchange for having centralized collection and reducing their administrative burden, they are giving up that cost recovery. And so that's immediately that's a big windfall, not a windfall, but it's a good infusion of revenue into the 911 system. Currently, even under estimates on this bill, for what revenue might be generated, it's still $50 million less than what's actually being spent at the local level based on data that we've received from the counties. So it eliminates cost recovery. It allows the service suppliers to bill subscribers cost recovery. That's really something that we don't really get into. That. It's a private business issue. Line 678 brings parity to the 911 fee by charging prepaid service the full $1.50. When we initially passed this legislation several years ago, people would go into the convenience store and buy a card and load minutes onto that card. And many of those folks went once a week and loaded minutes on that card. And so there was concern that if we charged $1.50 every time they reloaded the card, that there would be some folks that may be paying 2 911 fees. They may go every week, and they would end up paying $3 a month. So we settled on 75 cents when they purchased those minutes at the retail location. Currently, all prepaid plans are 30-day plans. Pretty much all of the prepaid throwaway phones, all of those plans are 30-day plans. And so we're asking that 911 fee, that there be some parity there, because the rest of us who have wireless service are paying a 30-day plan, and we're paying $1.50. And so we feel like those folks should be paying $1.50 as well, just like everyone else. So that, again, will generate some additional resources for your local 911 centers. Many of them are limping along, particularly in some of the rural areas of Georgia. We do have the very last section. Some of you may have heard there's some pending litigation between some of the counties and some of the service suppliers. This preserves any legal action or for any action against a supplier prior to January 1, 2019. That is when the authority will take over the enforcement and collection of fees. And so anything that's out there pending this legislation will not impact that litigation. It just gives a clear roadmap for the service suppliers moving forward January 1, 2019. We do have a very, I know everybody says this, a very simple amendment. This was one that Representative Cox asked about in subcommittee, and he wanted to make sure that we were providing notice to providers who did not register prior to fining them the $1,000 a day for failure to register. So we added a notice requirement at line 475. I put this in your folders. It should be there. Then on line 684, we had language in there that would require the service suppliers to start reporting 6 months early so the authority could see what those reports look like and be prepared to start receiving those funds and those reports. We changed that to have them submit their billing practices for approval by the authority so that everybody knows what the rules are going in from the day one. And the authority will understand how they will be remitting their reports and information. With that, Mr. Chairman, that was a really fast run through. I'll be glad to try to answer any questions that anyone has.
Okay. Okay, looks like we do have some questions. Let's see. Let's do this. Let's do it this way. I don't know if there'll be many questions or if there won't be many questions, but let's do this. If we'll ask if you have questions, more than one questions, if you'll ask your question, and then we'll go to another member and come back to you, because I don't want to get taking up the rest of the committee maybe with one member, but one or another member. So with that, Chairman Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several, but I'll stick with the chair's request. I think you said that in the subcommittee presentation that we needed to do this to get federal funds.
It will yeah, we don't
Right.
have to do it, but we're not getting any federal funds now because
Okay.
there's not an
Well,
agency.
In the subcommittee, you said we had to do this in order to be able to accept federal funds, and it's pretty clear to me, is it not true, that on 46.530, the agency can now receive federal funds?
GMA, is that who you're
That
talking
is correct.
about?
Is it not, the agency is defined as GMA and Homeland Security.
Correct.
So all we're doing is saying the authority can now receive federal funds. So in subcommittee, you represented that we needed to do this so that we could receive federal funds. We can receive federal funds today. Is that not true?
If GMA
Okay.
applied for them and if they were doing anything with 911, but they're not.
Now, I know Chairman Martin probably does have several questions. I want to get back to them, but I just want to go through and, what are you laughing at? Representative Cox. It was you. No, I'm sorry. Representative Jackson, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question on modernization. Of the 159 counties, can you give us a feeling in terms of what counties are leaning forward, they're ready for the 21st century, versus those counties that's going to need some heavy lifting?
We have the 911 Directors Association here, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say, some of the metro counties obviously have more resources and they're more prepared. But as you move out into rural and middle Georgia, they are woefully inadequate. They are not prepared for next generation 911. And none of their systems really talk to each other because there's not been any coordination to make that happen. And so it's very critical when you get out into the rural areas.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I'm asking the question, because when the southern part of Georgia had those tornadoes, the 911 system, it's my understanding, was very pressured and antiquated at best. So I just wanted to see if there was
So we would see the authority as playing the role of having some backup, or
Right.
having designated backup, or having designated and help people lay the plans for when there is a disaster like that and how they would have backup.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Representative Dickerson, did you have a question?
On lines 103 and 105, I just wanted to know if that was the same or different entities when you talk about the Georgia chapter of the National Emergency Number and then the Georgia Chamber of the National Emergency Number Association.
103, let me get to it so I can make sure I'm looking at the same thing that you are. That's correct. That's the same organization.
The same,
It
okay,
is. It
all right,
is.
okay.
And then there are actually three organizations here in Georgia that deal with 911. There's the 911 Directors Association. There's NENA, which is what that one is. And then there's ABCO, which is the Association of Public Safety Communication Officials. And so all three of those groups have been involved in drafting this legislation and putting it together.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chairman Martin, do you have another question?
Oh, yes, sir. We have time. Yes, sir. I'm just going to do one at a time. Which one gets to come to the front? Well, I'll get to one because everything's about dollars. It costs money. So looking through the bill, this authority, we're going to create a new government authority to help people coordinate emergency management, even though we have an emergency management Homeland
And to
Security
collect fees.
entity.
Yeah.
We have somebody that does that too. Commissioner Riley, the Revenue Department, does a fair job of that. But we're going to do that, and we're going to let you keep up to 3%.
I'm not keeping it. It's up to 3%.
Well, you're
The authority would
You're
keep.
presenting the bill. I
Okay.
mean, so we're going to let the authority keep up to 3% of the bill. So that seemed to be a good trade because the industry keeps 3% now.
Yeah,
But
that's current statute.
in the bill, they keep their 3%. So
That's
now we're
current
taking
statute.
6% off, and so we're taking 6% out of the pie that, in your testimony, you said is already underfunded.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see an issue with that?
The industry was not willing to give up their 3%. The authority has to have some money to operate. That's why we put up to 3%. Certainly, the hope would be that it would not take 3%. But because there is no data and we don't have any data available, we don't know how much it may generate that would be there for the operation of the authority.
Mr. Chairman, and again, I'll end the question with this and suggest that if we get to the point that because these two groups, the industry and ACCG and perhaps GMA, got together and forgot to bring in the people that pay the thing, I would hope that we would, if we get in a posture to move this bill, I'd hope we would have a maximum of 3%, and I'll let them figure out how they want to split it. But I don't see that the people of Georgia having to essentially double their fees because somebody these two groups got together and decided they needed another group to manage it. I think that's a bit onerous to put on the folks in a system that's already, according to the lady's testimony, underfunded. Well, yes, ma'am. And this is of a more friendly variety, I suppose. But we talked about this on the quorum for the thing. 8 members make a quorum. I would respectfully submit that 5 of 8 can, the way it reads now, if 8 are a quorum, 5 of 8 would be of action. I would hope the committee would consider that if 8 was a quorum, that it took all 8 to.
We have no issue with that. If
Yeah,
that's something the committee-
we had talked about that. I
Yeah.
think that's just a fair thing. That's much like because they can enter into contracts and so
Correct.
forth with that.
Yes, let me say this now. If anybody here plans to submit a amendment, which really is kind of against the rules of the committee anyway, because any amendments are supposed to be submitted to the chair, I think 24 hours before the meeting, but this, we're up against the wall, and I'm going to waive those things. But the thing is, if you do have an amendment, I would just suggest you go ahead and prepare it. If you do plan to submit one, not just you, Chairman, but anybody who has one, so we can go ahead and be ready. And because there'd have to be a sub drawn up to get to the clerk's office this evening, so it's something we'd have to be ready to do. I guess that's all I'm saying. Okay. Were you finished with your question? I'm sorry. Okay, let me come back to you then. And Representative Cox, did you have something?
Mr. Chairman, just knowing that we're up against the clock, I do want to just make the chair aware I do want to be recognized, if and when appropriate, on a motion regarding the amendment that's in the file.
And then Representative Jackson, do you have another question?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thanks. The previous question prompted my question, and I think I know the answer, but I would just love to hear when it comes down to routine audits. What authority is actually conducting those audits? Is it GMA, Homeland Security? I would love to.
You mean under this new proposed
Yes,
legislation?
under this
It
new-
would be the local government 911 authority. They would either contract with the auditors or have on-staff auditors that would go out and audit the service suppliers, but it would be for the whole state. It would be every jurisdiction that provider serves, or a sample of their customer base, as opposed to 150 different jurisdictions being able to go and try to do an audit, and them having to respond to 150 requests for audit.
Okay.
Okay. Before I go back to Chairman Martin, I want to ask this. You had mentioned that some of those rural centers were just barely getting along on the money. Why is that, though? I mean, what expenses on a day-by-day basis, once they have the equipment in place, other than payroll, what kind of expenses do they have? I don't see what.
Well, it's the payroll, and then the equipment is constantly having to be upgraded, and the 911 directors could speak to that better than I can, but they don't have a lot of retail business there, and they, quite frankly, just don't have a lot of people paying the 911 fee. I mean, that's where their funding comes from. And so from a population standpoint, they have very low populations. And so when you look at a metro Atlanta area and the population here compared to what they've got down in South Georgia. Now, they have been consolidating 911 centers and trying to have that economy of scale. So they have done a good bit of that down, especially like in Southwest Georgia.
Okay, I'm just thinking, I guess, on a day-by-day basis. They're upgrading, but let's see, I had a question in mind, now I've lost my train of thought thinking about that.
Mr. Chairman, I probably can add a little bit more texture to it, if you like.
Go ahead.
So when you're dealing with the 911 system, every entity that ties into it, from first responders to ambulance, fire department, etc., as they change their system, the connectivity and the interoperability may not be conducive when that system was installed. And so that's what happened to South Georgia. Their system not only was it interrupted from the tornadoes, but it wasn't interoperable because the police department may have changed theirs or upgraded it when the fire department or the ambulance may not. And so that's the problem in the rural parts of Georgia versus the more urban and like metro Atlanta. So that's the reason why I asked that question, because they don't have the either capacity or the capability to keep that system up, or they may not have the individuals trained to keep that system up. And so from an auditing standpoint, if we have a standardized audit, it will run through a checklist to make sure that the system, one, is preserved in all 159 counties versus having some integrity issues with the system.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me ask you this too. In reference to those 159 counties and those cities that we have, are there any, as far as the counties, how much consolidation is there of these different counties and cities, or is there any consolidation? Do we literally have 159 counties out there with 911 centers and then a bunch of cities?
No, sir. I think there's a total of 142 jurisdictions, and some of it is that they have consolidated city and county 911 operations, or the city may run it and the county contracts with them to do it. Southwest Georgia, there's one where I think there's 8 counties that have joined together into a regional 911 system. And then we have a lot of consolidation in rural Georgia of the county and the one city that may be in the county. And so there is some consolidation there.
Okay.
Maybe not what there should be, but hopefully with somebody to provide some guidance and planning, we would see more of that.
Well, let me follow up, if I may, on Chairman Martin's question about the 3% that would go to the authority. The providers have been getting their 3%, I guess, and they have, which kind of makes, I mean, I'm not trying to prejudice someone, but it kind of makes sense that they would get, they would have to get a certain amount of money because they're doing things that provide this service to the 911 centers. I mean, it's not something that just works automatically, I don't think. I mean, there's got to be some work involved in that. How did you all come up with the 3%? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how do we know that number 3% for the authority is pretty well in the ballpark or above?
Quite
more than it
honestly,
should be?
we don't.
Okay.
Which is why we put up to 3%, because there hasn't been any compilation of data or anything else. We really don't know what's out there, and which is why we put the up to 3% language. And remember, this authority board is made up of all local officials who operate 911 centers. So they're not going to want to be peeling off a lot of money that should be going to their own 911 center. One would hope.
Okay.
It is up to 3%.
Okay.
To give us some to give them some flexibility to figure
Okay.
out what kind of resources are going to be there.
Okay, thank you. Chairman Martin, did you have more? Light's not on, but did you? Just knew you had them? Okay.
I do have another. I mean, this is around the compensation. I know the board is working with the compensation in a code section where basically they get a per diem, which there's not. I think they may need to be added to one section of code ultimately, but you can do that later. But it's a serious question here. I mean, the board has to meet before September 1st this year if this bill passes. The authority has no budgeted money from the state of Georgia at all at currently, and won't have any revenue of its own until January 1st, 2019. So in practice, they can't encumber the state for any money. I mean, you're aware of that. So they're
Yes.
going to work until 2019 without any money.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Along those lines, I think it would probably make sense, and not hold the bill up today on it, but I think it probably makes sense to speak to, a maximum number of days they would meet and be compensated for. Most of the other boards have that. The World Congress Center, even legislative days do that. But the last thing around the impetus of this, because I've checked, it came up the end of last week. And I've checked with my city. I mean, all of us, politics is local, and we come down here to represent the 54,000. And my city manager is pretty, active, and Bob Regas, and they don't know of it. And his question to me is, what is this going to help me do? Why? And I mean, I feel ill at ease, and this is not anything new, that all of this is going on, and the people in this room are happy with it, and ACG may be happy with it, but all the counties may not be. Certainly all the cities don't know about it. And so what do I tell Bob Regas? What does the city of Alpharetta and Milton work together on their 911 center? I don't see anything in this bill that they gain from it.
Well, they immediately double their prepaid fees that they get annually. And I think Rishi may be here from GMA. There are only 23 cities who operate 911 centers. The rest are operated by counties. And so GMA has been a part of this group the whole time and has been communicating that with their cities. But immediately right off the bat, your city of Alpharetta, I think, got $120,000 last year in prepaid fees, so immediately they would get $240,000. If they're paying any cost recovery at this point, they would not have to pay that cost recovery, which could be 30 cents of the $1.50.
And I understand that, but all of that is wrapped into creating another state authority when we really don't know what it's going to do except audit.
And coordinate and plan and all of those things for next gen.
But that's not spoken to in.
Yes, it is. It's all lays out in the responsibilities of the authority. It's all there.
But there are no specifics into it. I mean, to tell him, and that's. I mean, perhaps, Mr. Chairman, I won't. Go. I just think I think a working group could do this. I think we could update the language.
We've had a working group.
Can I finish, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
A working group could do this, come back and give the committee some sort of an idea, because up to 3% at their numbers is somewhere up to $5.1 or so million. And I just think it's a lot of money to come out with, in a bill that was introduced last Wednesday. And I'd like to know more about it.
Thank you. Good question. Is there any more? I tell you what, here again, if you have any, and one thing in the subcommittee, one thing I mentioned there was that if you had any, and I know some of you have, if you had any questions or concerns or things you didn't like in the bill, to make sure that everybody knew, those who worked on it knew, so that they would know that you had those questions, and I think you have. But I'm going to get ready here in just a second or two to go ahead and ask what's the will of the committee. If you have any changes that you wish to make, you need to form them. You need to formulate those so that we can proceed. If you don't have any, that's good too. I do want to ask you. I think similar the same bill was going to be introduced in the Senate. Has that been done?
Yes, sir. It came out of the Senate committee this afternoon.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, did they change anything? Not that
only the
influences
amendment.
what we do. But
They're going to add the amendments. They forgot, actually. It was in their folder. They forgot the amendments that you have in front of you today that were in your folder. They will do the same amendments.
okay. All right. So we do have. I don't want to make sure to cut anybody off. Was it you who had somebody else had
An insert chapter.
Representative Dixon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In line 105, I wanted to strike chamber and insert.
That's fine. We're not ready to do it yet.
Oh, I thought you were.
It's just a typo that we're, yeah.
All right, we'll need some help from staff on this now. So we're getting ready to, I'm going to ask you what you want to do, first of all, and that's up to the committee. That's purely up to the committee, what you want to do. What is the will of the committee on this House Bill 446? 446 LC 2883667 ER.
Make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, what's your motion?
Motion to amend the House bill.
Well, what we're gonna do is we're going to, I need a motion to,
Move the previous question.
well, I need a motion to do something with the bill, and if there's a motion and a second to approve the bill, then we'll amend it into a substitute. So, if there is we can do it either way, but I think that's probably the better way to do it, or it doesn't, not necessarily the better way, but that's just the way I do it.
So you're seeking a motion either do pass or
Yes.
do not pass?
Yes.
Well, I think that, I think we do a lot of silly stuff in the Georgia General Assembly that is beyond the purview of our constitutional mandates. I think that public safety, however, is not one of those. I mean, I think this is a public safety measure that will keep Georgians ultimately safer and provide better service and ultimately speedier service and perhaps even save lives down the road. So for that reason, I'm prepared to make a motion, do pass, and hope the chair will recognize some amendments along that.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Now, is there any a motion to do pass and a second? Is there any discussion? And that would include proposals for amendments. Did you have one? Okay.
On line 105,
What line now?
105,
Okay.
I would like to scratch chamber and put chapter. It's,
The Georgia chapter, okay.
yes.
Okay. Are y'all helping me with this? Because I can never be able to keep up with it. So we have a motion for an amendment to make that change. I've already lost the line there. On line 106, 106 is change
No,
chamber
105,
to chapter.
yeah.
Is there we have a motion to do that. Is there a second? We have a motion for that amendment. Is there a second? Second. There's a second. Any discussion? All in favor of Representative Dixon's amendment indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. That amendment is approved. Okay. Any other amendments?
Mr. Chairman, two-part amendment in your folders. First part on line 475, after the words code section, move we insert the words upon receipt of notice from the authority. In the second half of the amendment would be line 684, strike the word reporting. In its place, insert the word billing practices. Following the new language ending in practices, strike 36-93-7B and insert in its place 36-93-7D.
All right. Would you just give us a brief explanation on the First Amendment, what the First Amendment does, what's the effect
Well,
of
my
it?
concern was, as we voiced in subcommittee, that we're giving the authority some authority. One of which is to fine people or fine entities at a pretty good clip of $1,000 a day. But there was really no requirement that these entities be notified of their responsibility to register. So,
Okay.
you know, I just think we ought to play fairly with folks who are providing this service. We notify them that they have this responsibility before we just start punching them in the gut and start fining them.
Okay. So you made a motion for your amendment. Do we have a second? Is there a second for that amendment? We have a second. Any discussion on that amendment? All in favor, Representative Cox's amendment indicate by saying aye.
Right.
Any opposed, no. That amendment is approved. You had a second one.
Well, I made the motion, I guess, as one single amendment.
Oh,
but
it
in
was
two-
one
in two
single one,
parts,
okay.
but-
You mentioned two different parts of the bill there.
Right, well, the line 684 amendment. And I just think it just gives some clarity. What they're trying to do here is, instead of during the initial ramp-up period requiring folks or entities to start submitting all of these reports that may not have even had rules made for the reports and how they should look yet in the initial phase, rather they would be submitting their billing practices so that the authority could sort of evaluate what those would look like and then make some reporting requirements that actually made sense for all the entities participating. Again, just trying to treat the providers a little more fairly. Government can be oppressive.
So on this, Cox, this is a second amendment, or was it?
Well, it's the second part of the
second part of-
amendment,
so we've
right,
already
right.
approved
And it's just, again, just treating the providers a little more
Okay.
fairly in reporting their billing practices for the initial ramp-up period, rather than
Okay.
reports that just, there is no rules for
So
them
we've
yet.
approved that already.
Yes.
Okay, we've had two amendments, and are there any other amendments? Noting that if we have any, this bill's not gonna get to the clerk's office in time to be recorded today. And that's a screwed up way to say it, but I mean, it's just the way it is. But that doesn't mean you can't make your amendment. That's not part of this process. Part of the process is we try to perfect bills.
As I said, I'm not a big fan of what we got going on here, and I do have some things, but in the interest of giving it a shot, I will look to try to make those changes if the rules chairman will
Okay.
allow it there. I won't try to
Okay.
bounce the proposition away. I'll
All right.
just vote no.
Chairman Martin, and here again, that's entirely up to you.
No,
As
it's fair enough.
As
I
a
mean,
valued
I'll-
member of this committee, you certainly have a chance. If it takes us all night and we don't get this in till tomorrow, then that's just the way it is. But I
Well,
just want to make
if
sure
the
that
chair would entertain a motion, I'd move to table the measure and take care of it tomorrow. but-
You'd have to be a substitute motion. I'm not a parliamentarian enough to know what takes precedence.
If I'm not recognized for that purpose, I'll yield.
Well, we have a motion on the floor, and hearing no further discussion, we have a motion for a due pass on this legislation, House Bill 446 LC 288367ER. Actually, it would be House Bill 447 as amended by committee substitute, LC 36334-9ERS. All in favor indicate by saying aye. On the amendment by Representative Dickerson, that is actually not in this substitute, but we can make that change. I mean, we want to make the change. It would just because of time right now, we'd have to get a new substitute drawn up to reflect that, but it will be changed. We'll have it changed in rules. All right, we had all in favor. Any opposed indicate by saying no.
No.
Okay, well, we're going to have show of hands. All in favor indicate by raising a hand. All in favor. How many? Okay, all opposed, raise your hand. Okay, it's 5-5. Chair votes in favor, breaks tie, it passes. And is there anything else from the committee? Unless there is something else from the committee, the committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Before you leave, we can get this turned in.
Okay.
Okay. And then that should be,
Okay.
Sorry, we
That
tried
one's
to get
correct.
to her,
Yeah.
get the other amendment
all
out.
right.
Okay.
Do you want me to do,
Hey.
sub for rules that makes this,
Just one sec, I'm sorry.
makes that change for rules?
Okay.
A new sub that just makes